Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Eov, the book of Job. We are in chapter 7, that is Perek Zion, and we are in the middle of Eov's first response to his friend Eliphaz. If you recall, Eliphaz, the Temanite, had said that God is always just, and if there is punishment, there must be sin. So you should be responding by looking into yourself and finding what it is that you did wrong, repenting for it, praying to God for forgiveness, and thus you can move forward and God will make everything all better. Eov responded to Eliphaz by saying nothing can possibly justify the kind of suffering that he is undergoing. Eov knows that he is innocent, and you and I, for studying this book, we know from God himself that Eov is innocent, that this is not a punishment. And we do not have an explanation for the suffering. And also, there is no guarantee that if Eov would repent from some alleged sin, that God would make things better in this world. It's not necessarily the case. And anyway, even if things would get better, that still would not take away the pain that he had experienced until now. Eov continues his speech in chapter 7, his response to Eliphaz. And this is a truly beautiful and disturbingly beautiful chapter. I may split this in half depending on how much time it takes, but or I may just go through the whole thing. The first thing Eov says in chapter 7 is Halo tzavah le'enosh ale oretz v'chimei sachir yamav. Eov looks first at the fragility of the human being and says, behold, a person has a tzava. Here it's the tzava often refers to army. Here it means a term of service, similar to a soldier's term of service. A soldier signs up for a certain number of years. So on earth, it's like our term of service. We're obligated to do this term. V'chimei sachir yamav. And his days are like the days of a hired laborer, a person hired to do a certain job. So these are two different types of relationships of servitude a person can have. A term of service for the army and an employee. In the verse 2, he compares the life of a human being on earth to the third type. Ke'eved yishaftel, like a servant who longs for, ke'eved, like a slave who longs for the shade. So if one imagines a soldier waits for the end of his term of service until he can be free from this military obligation. The hired laborer waits for the day to be up or the week or whatever, the term to be up so that he can get paid. While a slave can wait for maybe some better circumstance, slaving in a hot, sunny field, just waiting for the shade. And like a wage laborer, he waits for his wages. But all of these people live in a world, and we function within a world in which we wait for the reward, or we wait for the relief. However, Eov says in verse 3, Kain hanchalti li yarchesha, but I am here, I have been given the lot of months of futility. Because my months of suffering, there's no guarantee of any reward, there's no guarantee of any term of an end, and there's not even any guarantee of any sort of relief, any sort of shade, so to speak, for my suffering. V'leilos amal minuli. And for me, my appointment, what I have been gotten, are nights of difficulty. So I am just here suffering. So yes, the life of a human being on earth is similar to those three things that we compared it to, but my lot right now is even worse than those. What Eov is hinting to is, yes, it's true. If I had been in a situation where I knew that there's an end to this, it would be one thing. Then you and I can have the discussion we were having. But in my case, that's not the case. There is no end. Verse 4, Im shochavti v'omarti masai akum umidad erev. When I lay down and I say, when will I wake up? When will I get up from this suffering? However, the midad orev, the night, just drags on. There is no end. I could lie and think, when will it be over? But it just doesn't end. V'sovati nidudim adei noshef. And all I have is too many. I'm literally, this translates as I'm satisfied with tossing and turning until the morning comes. In other words, rather than getting sleep, which at least might relieve the pain for a little bit, instead I can't even sleep. I'm so uncomfortable, constantly tossing and turning in pain, which just keeps on going all night. So I don't even have that minimal relief that a suffering person has when he or she has at least a chance to sleep. Lavash, and then he describes the illness that he's suffering from. Lavash b'soriri mav l'gushafar. My flesh is covered with worms or maggots and dirt. Ori roga vayima'es. My skin is torn up and it's disgusting. People don't even want to look at me. Yamai kalu mini oreg. My days go so and this here means my good days, the days that I hearken back to, the days when I had a fortune, when I had wealth, when I had a family, when I had children, when I had honor, when I had everything. Those days, kalumini arag, they ran away from me so fast, just like the shuttler of a weaver. The shuttle is the tool that goes back and forth when weaving a garment. So it goes back and forth really fast, back and forth to lay out the garment, right? My days have just flown away as fast as the weaver's shuttle moves. Vayichlu bi'efes tikva. And they ended, those wonderful days ended with no hope for anything ever getting better. Zichor ki ruach hayai. Here, Eo was saying, remember that my life is just ruach, is just wind. And he's here, it's clear that he's speaking to himself, Zachar. I remember now when I'm suffering, as I am suffering so right now, I realize, and I remember, and I take it to heart, that my life is just wind. It just goes. All those good things that I remember just disappear. Lo soshuv eini liros tov. My eyes will never, and I have to come to the recognition that my eyes will never see the good again, that it never will happen again. You know, Eov is turning to his friend saying, you keep telling me, oh, it's all going to be great. Well, I don't know that. How do I know that? It seems to me now that this is just my lot, and this is the way it's always going to be. Lo sishureni ein ro'i. The person who sees me. This and the next few verses are interpreted in various ways, but I'm going to interpret this as referring to Eov looking back at his life that he had experienced that was good in comparison to the life that he's living now, the life of suffering and the life of pain. And Eov says, Lo sishureni, he who saw me before, right? In other words, those people who looked at me before when I was, as we'll see later on, Eov was an official of the city, a judge, a wealthy man, looked up to and everything. The one who sees me will never see me again. They will never see me in that life again. Now they look at me and I'm impoverished. I am ill. I look disgusting. I'm in pain. I have nothing to offer, nothing to do. They just look away from me. If people look at me and I'm not even there, people come to look at, where's the great Eov? The great Eov is gone. He's not there anymore. And he never will be back. Kala onan vayelach, the cloud has dissipated and is gone. Just like a cloud, you look in the sky and there's a cloud, you go back 5 minutes later, it's completely dissipated, completely gone. Kain yored she'ol lo yaleh. So too, the one who goes down to the depths of Sheol. Sheol is often translated as hell. And I wanted to compare this to the many places in Tanakh where it uses Sheol as the depths of suffering. Just give some examples in Shmuel chapter 2, verse 6, or Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 14, where Sheol refers to suffering. One who goes down into this pit of suffering and this pit of poverty, lo yaleh, will never get up. Think about the image of a homeless man, lying in the street who's sick and suffering, and people, he may or she may have had a life once before that was a life of honor, a life of wealth, a life of who knows what, we don't know, could be anything, but now they're gone and they'll never come back. You can talk as much as you want to about, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine in the end, but that's not true. At least there's no guarantee of it being true, and while a person is lying in that state, there's certainly no guarantee that it's true. So here I am, lo ya'aleh, that's this kind of person where I am now, will never get up. Lo yashuv od leveso, he will never return back to his house, the big nice house that he used to have. V'lo yakirenu od mekomo, and if he would go there, people wouldn't even recognize him anymore. It's gone. It's over. Now, this is these last few verses. I read the way I understand them and the way many understand these verses. However, Chazal, and famously in Masechet Bava Basra, understand Eov. Can't if you understand Eov to be referring to Sheol, actual hell, then it would sound like he's saying once one dies, one never gets up and arises again. Some of the classic commentaries understand the verses this way, which starts to beg the question: is what do you mean? Is there no resurrection of the dead? Now, there's many ways to understand it. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but on a simple, basic level, Eov is not talking about, um, death and hell, and so to speak, meaning what happens to people after they die. This is not something that Eov is addressing. He's very much addressing the actual world that he's living in, the physical world that he's living in, and the world that he used to live in. That's the context of these words, and it really does not beg the question at all of resurrection of the dead, which would be a completely different topic that's irrelevant to this chapter. Arthur, for the most part, isn't even mentioned within Tanakh at all, with the possible exception of reference to it in Daniel. But that's, again, a different subject, not for this podcast at this time. I think this, at the end of this verse 10, is a good stopping point for today's podcast. And we will continue to read the second half of this chapter and the conclusion of this speech of Eov, this response to Eliphaz, when we do 7b together. Thank you so much for studying together with me, and have a wonderful day.